over where we are in the book of Ruth. So Ruth chapter 1, there is the focus is on this family who is a husband, a wife, and two sons that move from Judah to Moab to find food. Isaac, the mic is, I think, a little bit loud. I'm hearing a little ringing. So they move from Judah to Moab. And while they're in Moab, the husband dies and the two sons die. And so the wife is left, Naomi is left as a mother-in-law with just two Moabite daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. But then they hear that there's food back in Judah, so they make their way back. And along the way, she tells them to go back, and Orpah goes back, but Ruth stays with her. But we can see sort of a little bit into the mind of Naomi that she's thinking, you know what, I'm worried about how I'm going to be received as someone who went away with 3 Israelite men and comes back with 1 Moabite daughter-in-law. But she returns back, and she's not in a good place. She says, don't call me sweet, call me bitter, because God has been bitter to me. I went away full, and now I came back empty. And so Ruth and Naomi, they wake up. They make this very faithful decision of taking this first step of obedience and to say, I'm not sure what this life is going to look like, but I know and I believe that this is what God wants me to do. So I'm going to take this step of faith in chapter 1. Chapter 2 is day 2 of that life. Recognizing, well, now we got to eat. And so Ruth gets up and she walks outside and she says, you know what? I need to find a field for me to eat, to get food from. And God had built out this welfare system in the Levitical law where if she goes into a field, people will leave behind the scraps of the reaping. It just so happens to be at the beginning of the barley harvest. The beginning of the barley harvest. And so these reapers are going around and they're gathering these grain, and some are falling on the edges. And so Ruth is going around and she's gleaning. She sits down for lunch while the workers are no longer reaping in the field. She has to stop. And so just so happens that she ends up in this field of a man named Boaz, who happens to be a distant family relative to Naomi, the mother-in-law. And so then they have this interaction, but basically Boaz protects her. And he says to her, don't go in any other field, but stay with my men. We will take care of you. If you go somewhere else, you'll get assaulted. Stay with my men and my women in my field, and I will take care of you. And then he says to her, come, sit at the table, and eat of our food. Dip your morsel into the wine, eat the roasted grain. And it says that she ate until she was satisfied and even had leftovers. And so she goes home with an ephah, a bag, bag of rice, worth of grain on one day. And Naomi says, whose field did you go to? She's like, oh, it's this man named Boaz. And Naomi says, stay near to Boaz, because he is a redeemer. He is a relative. Redeemer in the book of Ruth means somebody who can be your provider and be your protector. Someone who will redeem you as a family member. She says, stay next to Boaz. He is a redeemer. He's a family member. And so Ruth did for the 7 weeks of the barley harvest. Now we come to chapter 3. Now, chapter 3, if you knew the story of Ruth before this, you probably didn't know maybe the details of chapter 1. Maybe you didn't know all the agricultural, artifacts there in chapter 2. But I think you probably remember chapter 3, because chapter 3 is the sexy chapter. Although in an Asian crowd, maybe the sexy chapter is chapter 2, where she gets up early and works really hard, until the evening. I don't know. Okay, but we find ourselves in chapter 3. Okay, so she's been gleaning with Boaz and Boaz's men every day for 7 weeks and throughout the barley harvest. And then, verse 1 of chapter 3. Was that me? Okay. Oh. Okay. All right. So this is chapter 3, verse 1. It says, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you that it may be well with you? Now, what's she saying here? She's saying, you've worked hard for 7 weeks. You got up early. You worked till late. You carried that bag of rice home every day, right? You worked so hard in your gleanings that I want to find rest for you. I don't want you to have to keep living like this. You've been working really hard. I want to find rest for you that it may be well with you. Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young woman you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. You have no idea what it means. I'll tell you, don't worry. He is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say, I will do. Now, a lot going on here. A lot to unpack here. Okay, chapter 3 begins with the end of the barley harvest. Now, they don't have enough food maybe to last for them for maybe the whole year or whatever it is, but Naomi is like, I don't want you to keep living like this. And so she says, I got an idea. Okay? She's like, what happens at the end of the harvest? Okay, let me just back up a little bit. So what you do is you plant seeds, right? That's sowing, right? And then it grows. You got to take care of it, tend it, tend your crop. And then when it comes to fruition, when it comes into bloom, right, or full growth, then you go and you reap it, right? That's where you get that sickle, right, where you reap things. You cut things down and you knock it all down. And then at the end of the harvest, you go through the field. It takes 7 weeks to go through all the fields, right? You're cutting everything down. And then you go to the threshing floor where you winnow the grain, okay? So this is what the celebration is, okay? Remember I mentioned to you, for them, their food was really their finances, right? It was their security. We get paid every 2 weeks, every week, or maybe every month, but for them, they got paid probably like once or twice a year in the harvest season. And so imagine you finally, you worked for your job, and then at the end of the year, they give you one big fat paycheck, right? Like I said, we'd probably be like, hey, dinner's on me. I just got this big fat check. We're going to go out to eat. We're going to go celebrate. And so this is what they would do. They would actually go up to this place called the threshing floor because he's winnowing barley at the threshing floor. That was where they would go, and essentially they would count out the money that they made for the year. They would count out all of the harvest, all of God's faithfulness throughout the year. This is where they would take all the grain and they would separate the wheat and the chaff. Now, I'm going to explain how this all worked for you. So, you get the stalk, right? You reap it, there's a stalk, and on that stalk are parts of the grain, right? The parts that you actually eat. But there's a whole stalk and everything like that, right? So, what it ends up happening is you're not separating it there when you are harvesting, when you're reaping. You don't have time. So what you're doing is just cutting everything down, throwing it in a basket, cutting everything down, throwing it in a basket, cutting everything down, throwing it in a basket. And you take that basket, you go and drop it off, and you go through and you reap. And then you get stacks of stalks of grain, right? And then what you would do is you would crush the grain, right? You would crush the stalks into this pile, right? And actually, this is where you would get oxen. Have you ever seen a hole where they tie a post in the middle, right? And then they walk the oxen around the post. You know what they're doing? They're threshing wheat. They're threshing wheat. What it means is threshing means separating the wheat from the chaff, the stalks from the actual grain. So this is what they would do. They would separate it, right? And then they'd throw more stalks of wheat onto the ground. The oxen would tread it, separate it, right? And then they would take what they would call, you get this pile now of all of these stalk pieces and pieces of grain. And you know what they would do is they'd take this winnowing fork. And you know what they would do is they would pick it up and they throw it up in the air, straight up in the air. Just this is the only motion, throwing it straight up in the air. But the point is you put a threshing floor on a high place where it is windy. Because what ends up happening is you pick it up, you throw it up, and the wind comes and it separates the wheat, which falls, from the chaff, which gets blown by the wind. So there's so many New Testament scriptures that use this language, and we've had no idea what they were talking about. Separating the wheat from the chaff is separating the useful pieces from the pieces we don't want, right? God will take his winnowing fork, is some passages that say, and he's separating the wheat from the chaff. This is exactly what they would do. So they would take this, they would crush it, the wheat stalks, they would throw it up, the wind would take the chaff, and the grain would fall to the ground. Then they'd pick up the grain, and they'd move it into a pile. And this is what they would do at the end of the harvest. They're celebrating the goodness of God. They're trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, those pieces of grain. You can see one piece of grain in there from the chaff and all of the other pieces that they don't need. Matthew chapter 3, verse 12 says, his winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will clear his threshing floor and gather his wheat into the barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. This comes from the Gospel of Matthew, where he's talking about how Jesus will separate his people from those that are not his people. So this is agricultural language that is very familiar to the audiences that lived at the time. Not to us. That's why I'm here. Okay, so think about this. You've just reaped your harvest. You've been waiting for this all year. You didn't actually know. So it's sort of like maybe investing in a stock, but then like blindly not knowing like how it is, like hoping that it's going to be good, because at the end of the harvest, you don't actually know how good your crop will be, because maybe you got good seed, maybe you got bad seed, right? In fact, you don't know, but at the end of the harvest, you realize the payoff of what your investment has been. And so if you got paid all at the same time, we all just got paid like our paycheck last night, like we would throw a pretty good party. I mean, you guys make some pretty good food for retreat food. But like, I mean, we'd have sushi, we'd have like, Korean barbecue, like we go all out, right? Private chef. I mean, I don't know, right? Because if we all got paid, like we would be celebrating. And this is what a threshing floor was. It was a celebration of the faithfulness of God over the last many weeks. Deuteronomy chapter 16 alludes to this fact. And it says, you shall keep the feast of booths 7 days, when you have gathered in the produce from your threshing floor and your winepress. You shall rejoice in your feast. Deuteronomy 16:13 is saying, y'all need to throw a party. Y'all need to celebrate the faithfulness of God's provision for you. Now, this is talking about the Feast of Booths, but the feast that is talking about in Ruth chapter 3 is called the Festival of Weeks. The Harvest Festival, which is in Hebrew is called Shavuot. Shavuot. It's a minor Jewish holiday, but what I find so fascinating is that during this minor Jewish holiday, your Jewish friends will go to temple and they will go and read scripture. And do you know what scripture they read? They read the book of Ruth, because it is the time where the Festival of Weeks is celebrated. The Shavuot is in the book of Ruth. So during this minor Jewish holiday, they would go and read the book of Ruth. So these people would gather, and usually it was the men, because they were the ones that were separating and winnowing. They would winnow the grain all night, and then they would take a break, and then they'd eat some, they'd roast some, they'd eat, they'd celebrate, and yes, they would drink. So you think about this celebration, right? Tons of food, just feasts of food, all of the celebration, all of the food that you have prepared, the morsels and the wine and everything like that. And you're pouring wine liberally to everybody, just saying like, let's celebrate. This is a day for us to be able, it's like a wedding feast, right? Pulling out all the stops, and it takes many days. in Deuteronomy 16, it says to spend 7 days winnowing, celebrating. So it's a 7-day wedding reception when everybody got paid the night before, right? Like, I mean, this is a party of all parties. Now, what do you think the men are doing at a party like this? If it's men and we're all working, we're all eating, celebrating, we're all in a good mood, and we're all drinking, right? I mean, we are drunk, right? I mean, we've been celebrating for 7 days. I mean, I could drink alcohol like I can hold down my alcohol, but for 7 days without like, man, and like when you put your hands to like tools and like you work manual labor, maybe you've been doing something like that. You design bathroom, work in bathrooms, right? Like at the end of the day, I don't know if you drink, but like you pop a cold beer at the end of the day, it's different than when I've been sitting at a computer than when I am like, winnowing, threshing wheat, right? When you're doing like, so, I mean, let's make no mistake, okay? These men are drunk, right? They're drunk. They're celebrating. They're full on food and they are drunk on wine. And so Naomi says, I want you to get dressed up. And I want you to wash yourself. And I want you to aroma yourself. I want you to smell fragrant, right? We have somebody who works with fragrance. I want you to smell nice. I want you to look nice. And I want you to go. But don't reveal yourself until after they're done eating and drinking. Why would Naomi tell her to wait until after they're done eating and drinking? That's the best time that they're in a mood for, right? Like, I'm full, like, oh my gosh. Like, you go to the Korean barbecue place, right? Especially when your parents are paying, and it's like, oh, right? You get the sushi boat, like, oh man, you're just so full. You just, at the end of the meal, you just push back and you're just like, life is good. So wait until they're done eating. And wait till they're done drinking. And watch and see where he lies down. Because Naomi has a plan. I want you to go to this party under the cover of darkness and under the cover of drunkenness. Now, why else would she wait? Why else would Naomi wait till it was dark? Hosea chapter 9, verse 1. This is God talking to the Jews. So the meaning of the passage is actually not what we're getting at. It's actually just the words. But he says, you have been unfaithful to your God. You love the wages of a prostitute at every threshing floor. Now, again, we're not here to discuss like the prophecy against Israel that God is saying. No, we're just trying to use that phrase. When God is, speaking judgment against the Jews, what he says is you love the wages of a prostitute, meaning you like working as a prostitute at a threshing floor, which means that there were prostitutes at threshing floors. Because, okay, now I know we don't usually talk about this in church, but if I was a prostitute, right? That's maybe the first time I've ever uttered that sentence. If I was a prostitute and I wanted to make money, where do I go? I go to a threshing floor. You know why? Because the men are drunk, they are full, they're celebrating, they're tired. Like, if I'm a prostitute, I go to a threshing floor. And now Naomi says, okay, come here. I want you to wash yourself. I want you to get dressed up nice. I want you to spray fragrance on you. And I want you to go to the threshing floor. But I want you to wait until everybody falls asleep. Because I don't want you to be seen as a prostitute. Because if you see a woman, if we're all the men here, we're at a threshing floor and we're winnowing grain, we see a woman walk by, you know who we think that is? Oh, I know why you're here. You're a prostitute. That's why you're here. And so Naomi says, I don't want people to see you as a prostitute. So I want you to wait, but watch, but wait in the darkness. So, understanding that prostitutes were the women at these threshing floors were prostitutes. And Naomi doesn't want Ruth to be seen, this poor Moabite widow, an outsider of outsiders, a woman, a widow, a Moabite, a foreigner, an immigrant, a migrant, a widow, and a woman in that community. The last thing she needs, the last moniker that she needs on her life is prostitute. It reminds me of another celebration, another scheme that was hatched in Genesis 38. Now, we're taking, like a detour on a detour, okay? But it's just so fascinating, okay? We go to Genesis 38. Genesis 38 is coming right around the story of Joseph. And then we come to this one passage, this one chapter in Genesis 38. It's really fascinating. But it talks about this woman named Tamar. In Genesis 38, verses 12 through 15 says this. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. Okay? So there's this man, Judah, and his wife dies. But Judah had recovered from his grief. He went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep. Judah, his wife dies, right? And Judah's wife dies, and then he mourns. But then after that, he goes up to the celebration of shearing sheep. Now, how many of you have sheared sheep? None of you. But it's the same thing. Sheep grow. They're wool. And so what you would do is you would wait and wait and wait, and then you would go take all the sheep to this celebration, and then you would shear the sheep in a celebration, because this is, again, how you get paid. You would then go sell the hides and the wool and everything like that. So there's this whole celebration. So what kind of celebration is it? It's going to take days. You're going to have a celebration. You're going to have a lot of food. You're going to have a lot of drink. And any woman that's there is probably there because she's a prostitute. It's the same sort of situation. Verse 13, when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that, though Shiloh had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. What happens is, Tamar, her husband died, right? And then in that law, which we talked about, she no longer has a husband to be the redeemer, to be the one to provide and protect for her, right? Same theme. Same thing as Naomi. Same thing as Ruth. She doesn't have someone to take care of her. She doesn't have someone to redeem her. And so the law at the time said that Tamar's dead husband's brother should be the one to marry her. Not because of love, but because of protection, because of provision. And so Judah was not telling his son to marry Tamar. So now Tamar is left completely vulnerable. And she hears, your father-in-law is going up to shear sheep. And she goes, I got it. So this is what she does. When Judah saw her, she dresses up, she takes off her mourning clothes, puts on a veil to cover her face. She sits in this path on this place that is on the way up to Timnah where he's going to go shear sheep. And when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, because why is she there while we're shearing sheep? For she had covered her face. He didn't realize who it was. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me go with you. So Tamar's husband died. Judah didn't let the other son fulfill the levirate law of marriage, and so she took matters into her own hands. Now, before they sleep together, Judah wants to pay her, and she's like, I want some of your items. He's like, I don't have money to pay you now, but he's like, I'll pay you later. And she's like, well, give me some of your items as a promissory note for your payment. So he gives her some items in exchange for consummating this relationship with this prostitute. And then, I can't get into it all. It's so fascinating. Genesis 38, you should go read it. Later, right, Tamar gets pregnant. And they were like, weren't you in mourning? Like, your husband died. And you're not married. So how did you get pregnant? She's like, I did. She's like, the man who got me pregnant gave me these. And so everybody knows it's Judah. So her plan works. So understand, I mean, the Old Testament, y'all, right? I mean, it gets a little funky, right? But you have a widow who pretended to be a prostitute, who seduced her father-in-law, got pregnant, and then exposed him. And then when she reveals that it was Judah, everybody says, oh, well then that's okay. You know why? I know. If you have a question, please go talk to Pastor Joe after. Do you know why? This is the reality. And it's a cultural thing, and it's really hard for us to see this at the time because of all the funkiness, right? But the reality is you have a son from the family. And so, this marriage law, this provider, protector, this redeemer has come within the family. And so we're okay with it. We don't love how it happened, but we're okay with it because now, Tamar, you are taken care of. You now have a son who will then be able to take care of you. That's how much they valued being taken care of by a family member when you were a widow. So, this is the same story that people who were hearing Ruth would have thought of. Naomi goes, hey, I want you to go lay down next to Boaz when he's sleeping and when he's sleeping it off. I want you to go lay down next to him. Everybody would have thought of Tamar. Naomi would have thought of Tamar. Because you know what? If you seduce Boaz and you get pregnant, everybody's going to be okay with it. Because he's a redeemer. He's a family member. And even though Tamar got pregnant by Judah in a really weird sort of way, everybody was cool with it. Because we want an heir. We want protection. Now, she says, go lie down next to him. And she says, and uncover his feet and lie down. Now, in the Hebrew, foot can mean foot. Foot can also mean leg. And in Hebrew, foot can also mean further up the leg. It was sort of like it's like a euphemism, if you know what I'm saying, right? So let me just say here, this if we ended the sermon right now, I'd be in trouble. But Naomi's basically saying like, hey, I want you to go up to the threshing floor. And Ruth's probably like, the threshing floor? Like, you want me to go to a threshing floor? She's like, I want you to dress nice. I want you to smell nice. I want you to wait and watch and see where, and, don't be seen. But I want you to go and I want you to uncover his foot. And Ruth knows. She knows what she's talking about. Because you see later on in this passage. Basically, Ruth should go and undress Boaz, which is actually the same word that is used in Genesis 38 of Tamar and Judah. Naomi wants Ruth to seduce Boaz and basically do anything that you can to have sex with him. Because that's your path. That's Naomi's path to protection and provision. That's the way to security. Now, I work for a nonprofit organization, as Pastor Joe mentioned yesterday. And part of the work that we do in our casework is trafficking, human trafficking, modern-day slavery. And one form of that is sex trafficking of children and trafficking of adults. And I can't help but read Ruth 3. Now, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I didn't see it this way. But now working for this organization for 10 years, I cannot help but think that I have heard story after story of someone just like Naomi that says, I don't know where we're going to get enough money to live. And so I will take a child and I will sell that child for sex in order to make my money. I've seen it time and time again. I've seen relative after relative take their child and sell them for labor or for sex in order to survive. And I've never thought before I started working here of trafficking in this passage in Ruth chapter 3. But it seems like a pretty classic case of her taking her daughter and basically saying, I want you to go have sex with a man so that we are secure financially. There's another reason why Naomi wants Ruth to throw herself at Boaz. In Exodus chapter 22, it says, if a man seduces a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall give her the bride price for her and make her his wife. There is actually not just the fact that if you get pregnant by him, then God will be, that will be your heir and everybody will be okay with it. But there's actually a law in Exodus where it says if somebody sleeps with a prostitute, he should do right by her and marry her, pay the bride price. And Naomi's thinking, okay, well, maybe if you seduce him and he wakes up and realizes that he slept with you, then he'll make good and he'll actually marry you. Then we're really set. We don't have to wait for a baby to be born. We don't have to wait for a son to grow up. He's your husband. Like, we're set. She's like, I got it all planned out. I know what we're doing. The ironic thing is that Naomi was counting on Boaz doing the right thing after doing a wrong thing. Oh, Boaz is a man of honor. He'll do the right thing after you're trying to get him to do the wrong thing. Naomi is still seeking her own path of security and financial striving. Now, let's see what happens. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain, right? All of this food. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." You remember in chapter 1 when I said, when she turns back and she says, go back to your own country and to your own people and to your own God. And she says, may Yahweh spread his wing over you, right? It's a foreshadowing to chapter 3. Because now Ruth is saying, spread your wing over your servant, for you are a redeemer. This is language from the Old Testament prophets, where God would basically spread himself in covering and protection. But it also was a euphemism for sex. So she was basically saying, I want you to spread your wing over me and consummate this, because you are a redeemer. Boaz says, may you be blessed by Yahweh, my daughter. That's your first clue. That's probably not going to go the way that Naomi wants it to go. He calls her my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after younger men, whether poor or rich. What he means by that is, The latter greatness, right? This last kindness is you coming to me and offering yourself to me. That's a kindness. Is greater than your first kindness, which was you taking care of your mother-in-law. This last kindness greater than the first, in that you've not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. That's a signal that Boaz was probably a little bit older, right? He was wealthy, he was a man of stature, he was a man of prestige. So chances are he was a little bit older. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. In a sense, what he's saying is, I refuse to besmirch your name. Everybody knows that you're an honorable woman. Everybody knows what you did for Naomi. And they see how hard you've been working. Even though you're a Moabite, people honor you. I'm not gonna sully your name. I'm not gonna bring you down. I'm gonna hold you with dignity. And I'm gonna do what you say. I will take care of you. But I want to do it in the right way. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. I am a family member that is able to fulfill the marriage law to marry you and give you a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, this other redeemer, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then I, as the Lord lives, as Yahweh lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. So it happens just as Naomi expected. She uncovers his feet, lies down. He says, oh my God, who's this? She's like, it's Ruth. Spread your wing over me because you are a redeemer. Basically, let's have sex because that would even be a fulfillment of this levirate law of marriage to provide me an heir. So she's saying, all of the pieces are there. You don't even need to feel guilty about it because and I bet Boaz was thinking about Tamar and Judah. Well, yeah, if I sleep with her, then she gets pregnant. It's not that bad because I'm actually a redeemer anyway, and I could just say that we were just fulfilling this levirate law of marriage. But Boaz is an honorable man. And he says, you know what? I'm not going to do it. You see, Naomi was banking on Boaz doing the right thing after he did a wrong thing. But Boaz was a man of honor. And he says, no, I'm going to do the right thing instead of doing a wrong thing. So this is exactly what happens. If you go back to Deuteronomy one more time, and you recognize this command here, and it says, if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. So this is exactly what is going on. Boaz says, I am a kin, I am a redeemer, but there is somebody that is closer than me. So verse 14 then says, so she lay at his feet. Here it probably just means feet. She lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before anyone could recognize another. Why does she wake up early? Because if she's seen on a threshing floor, waking up, people will think that she's a prostitute. And he says to her, Boaz says to her, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. See? And he says to her, bring the garment that you are wearing and hold it out. So bring this dress that you're wearing, hold it out. So he held it out and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, how did you fare, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Do Do you see the heart of Boaz? That I stay here till morning. I don't want people to think that you're a prostitute. I'm going to protect you. But don't just go back empty-handed. I'm going to provide for you. So even though he hasn't fulfilled this Deuteronomic law, the Levirate law of marriage, he's still providing for her, still protecting her, still redeeming her. He says, I want you to take this back to your mother-in-law. And then verse 18, she replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. Remember, he says, I'm going to go talk to that other redeemer. So, we don't know what's going to happen next once we get to the end of chapter 3. And I will say, Ruth chapter 1 ends with the beginning of the barley harvest, right? Ruth and Naomi arrive back at the beginning of the barley harvest. It's a little bit of a cliffhanger. And then chapter 2 ends with the end of the barley harvest, which is a little bit of a cliffhanger. And then here, she says, he's going to do right by you. And then we move to chapter 4. It's also a little bit of a cliffhanger. Did you also know that the term cliffhanger originated in the Palisades? Because Fort Lee used to be the original Hollywood. And when they wanted to end suspensefully, they would hang off the cliffs on 9W, and they would film like a person hanging off a cliff, and then they would make them wait for the next episode. That's why they literally call it a cliffhanger, because of the cliffs in Fort Lee on 9W. That has nothing to do with anything. I just thought that was really funny. Hollywood actually began in Fort Lee, like literally Fort Lee. Where Constitution Park was the lot. And then they moved to Hollywood, and they were like, oh, we can be around sun the whole year. Okay, so there's a lot of fascinating things here, right? And again, this is probably the part of the passage that you remember, but you probably may not remember all of the different little ways that the scriptures really sort of coming alive. And I think it's a really interesting thing here, because you see throughout these scriptures, throughout these passages, you're seeing people taking that step of faith and really going about living their lives in different ways. We remember Elimelech in chapter 1, where he basically was saying, I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to do my will my way. I'm moving my family from Judah to Moab. I'm going to take care of this myself. Reminds you of Judges, right? Where it says in the time of the Judges, was what the times of Judges were known for. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everybody did what was right in his own eyes. That's what Elimelech was doing. And then you come to Naomi in chapter 3, where I think she was trying to do the right thing. She was trying to do God's will, but she was doing it her way. She was trying to do right. And again, I spent so many years judging Naomi pretty harshly. But in my old age, now I recognize, I see a lot of myself in her. I want to do God's will, but I get a little impatient. And I think I know the best way forward. I may know what God wants me to do, but you know what? I think I may know the best way to get there. Naomi says, I'm going to do God's will, but I'm going to do it my way. But we encounter this person of Boaz who says, no. I'm going to do the right thing, but I'm going to do it in the right way. I'm going to make sure that this is true from beginning to end. Which means, to me, this is the picture of faith for us. Throughout the book of Ruth, right, you saw Ruth making that faithful step, that dramatic first step of saying, where you go, I will go, where you live, I will live, where you die, I will die, and be it so severe, if God will punish me, if anything but death separates me from you, I'm going with you, I'm committing to you. She takes this first step of faith and says, I know that this is what God wants me to do. And no matter what, day one, I'm going to follow you. And then Ruth 2, we said, was day 2. She wakes up and she's like, well, we got to eat. What do we do? So she goes out faithfully, just taking steps, working hard. And it just so happens that God takes care of her, puts her in Boaz's field. Just so happens to be Boaz's field. The faithfulness of walking day 2 very faithfully with God. And now we see the picture of faithfulness in chapter 3. Because you know what was happening was, day 1 was like getting back to Judah. Day 2 was like, how are we going to eat right now? But Naomi was thinking, how are we going to live after the harvest? How is this going to scale for all you business-minded people, right? How does this scale? How does this sustain itself? How do we make sure that we are not in this place time and time again? How are we going to live ongoing? Ruth 1 is about day 1. Ruth 2 is about day 2. And Ruth 3 is about ongoing and how are we going to live every day in the future. And I recognize that sometimes we look at all of the circumstances around our lives and we allow those circumstances to dictate how we are going to act. Boaz very easily could have slept with Ruth because it was dark, people were drunk, and, which by the way, I just realized, I think the fact that Boaz woke up and could have like a full conversation probably showed that he wasn't drunk, right? I never thought about that before. Anyway, Boaz, probably not drunk, but could have had every opportunity because everybody else around him is either sleeping with their own prostitute or is drunk and sleeping it off. Probably could have gotten away with it. But he says, no, I'm going to do this the right way. I'm not going to look at the circumstances. Chuck Swindoll has a quote here that says, faith does not change my circumstances. Faith changes me. I don't believe in a God in order for God to change my circumstances. I believe in a God. I have faith in a God so that God can change me amidst whatever circumstances I may find myself in. Originally when I wrote this sermon, I used a different quote in this moment. But that quote was by a pastor that I can't quote anymore. Not because it's not a true quote, but because he got canceled. And it's so interesting. This quote by a canceled pastor is illustrating the point of doing God's will in the right way. And so I can't use that quote because he did God's will but didn't do it in the right way. And I actually had to Google Chuck Swindoll, who was my president of the seminary, one of the seminaries I attended. It's like, did Chuck Swindoll get canceled? It's like, I don't know. Like, we don't know anymore, like who's safe anymore. But that's kind of the point, right? So many people, so many pastors have gone through the work of doing God's will, but not doing it in the right way. There's so many people out there that do good work, the work of ministry, the work of the kingdom, but they don't do it in the right way. A few years ago, I was brought into a new startup organization that was working in Asian American Christian spaces. I was running their fundraising and their operations. And I was working very closely. I was basically the number 2 of this organization, very closely with this leader of this organization, helping steer and lead the team in our influence and in our programs, making sure that more and more people knew about what our organization was doing. But over time, 2.5 years, as I got closer and closer to the center of the power of the organization, I began to see some cracks. I began to see some problematic traits of this leader. I saw how he would sometimes gaslight other female leaders and would lead from insecurity and fear. And personally, I would be on the receiving ends of some of these tirades and abuse, not directed at me, but directed at other people that would leave me and my head spinning. I would ask myself at the end of the day, like, am I the crazy one here? My daughter, I'd be in the car and I'd be driving her somewhere. And I'd be on a call and we'd end up yelling at each other and stuff like that. We'd get off the call and she'd be like, you guys yell a lot. Because that's what we were just like constantly yelling at each other. but we're here doing this really good work. Maybe for you, you've had someone in your life who's treated you the same way. Maybe somebody who, the kids call toxic, right? Who makes your head spin, who gaslights you, makes you question reality. It might be a boss. It might be a spouse. It might be a parent. It might be a friend. It might be a child. The reality is that I couldn't take it. So I left this organization. And before I left this organization, I wrote a letter. And I outlined all of it, because that's who I am, right? So I wrote a letter, and I outlined all of my concerns, and I sent it to him. And I said, hey, I just want you to know these are my concerns that I have. And then I heard nothing. He never responded. To this day, I've heard nothing. Heard nothing from him, heard nothing from the board. And so I just moved on, and I made my peace, and that was it. Now, this experience for me was years ago, and I have definitely moved on. But a few months ago, I received a phone call from somebody that I had never met before, who knew and worked with this organization, and someone who was working with this organization and had questions and had heard these whispers about this leader. So she reached out to me. We'd never met before. She reached out to me and she said, hey, I just want to hear about what your experience was. And so she heard that, she took that, she went to the board of this organization. She said that she was going to broker this reconciliation conversation between this organization and me. She wanted to make sure that we were brought together and have this moment of reconciliation. And a couple weeks later, I was told that the board was going to reach out and broker a conversation of reconciliation and accountability. So they were going to actually stand up and actually do it. Now, in that moment, when I received that email to say that the board was going to reach out, I was actually a little conflicted, if I'm being honest. Because I was definitely treated poorly by this person. I definitely deserve an apology. I definitely deserve reconciliation. But there was a part of me that didn't want to do it. Because if I'm being honest, that anger, that hurt, that bitterness, that resentment that had grown in my heart had bore this neat, nice little hole in my heart. And my heart had learned how to function around this neat, nice little hole of resentment. And there's a part of me that didn't want to let it go because it was familiar and it was comfortable. And I think it gave me a little bit of agency to say, as I can hold on to this, and that gives me a little bit of power in this situation. And reconciliation means I got to give that up. And I kind of don't want to. I kind of like holding on to this because I'm right. I was wronged. And as long as I'm wronged, I get to walk around, and every once in a while, I can just go to someone and just be like, hey, you want to see this little hole in my heart of resentment? Because, that guy. But reconciliation means, no, I got to give that up. And that passage of David in the Old Testament where he has the chance to kill Saul, and then he just nicks off the corner of his robe, and then later on he's just like, see, I could have killed you, but I didn't, right? I felt like a little bit like that. I didn't want to kill the guy, but I did want to murder his character. I wanted to hold on to that. And so when I was offered reconciliation, I didn't want to do it. But I was like, there's no answer but yes here, right? I remember asking my friends, I can't get up and preach about forgiveness and reconciliation if I'm secretly holding on to this little resentment, this hole in my heart. So literally in obedience, literally against my feelings, literally against my will, I was like, okay, yeah, sure, I would love to. Right? But yes, I have to be willing to do that because that's the right thing. I have a leader who is treating me, doing good work, doing really good work, but wasn't doing it in God's way. And I was then given an opportunity to say, will you do the work of God, doing it the right way. And I can't not say anything but yes, I have to. Because this is the way of obedience to God's will. To love an enemy. I remember also having a conversation with my CEO, the CEO of International Justice Mission. And, does anybody work at a nonprofit? You should try it. It's great. Not the money, but the job. We work as a nonprofit. And so right now we're about a $110 million organization, 1,400 employees worldwide. And what that means is that $140 million that we get in every year is money that, $110 million that we get every year is money that we have to go out and find. We have to go and raise it. And so my first 5 years at IJM was as a fundraiser. So I would go around and I would preach at churches and I would, create partnerships with churches and raise money. And so we have to go out and raise $110 million. We have many donors that give, multi-million dollar gifts every year. We have grants that afford us opportunities to spend millions and millions of government money, of private money. We have corporations that have given us grants because they want to clean up their supply chain and they want to make sure that we're doing things the right way. And this CEO, now understand, right? We budget, we raise a certain amount of money, and then we budget off of it for the next year. We say, okay, well, next year we're going to raise $110 million, we're going to raise $120 million, and so we're going to budget off $120 million, which means 1,400 people's salary gets budgeted off of $120 million, right? And some years we surpass that. Some years we meet that. And occasionally, maybe 2, 3, 4 times throughout our 30-year history, we've missed. And you know what happens is things freeze. We've had, travel freezes, hiring freezes, things like that. Some people sometimes have been laid off, or some people who quit get not replaced. Their headcount goes away because we have to save money, because we don't sell a product. We don't have a lever that we can pull and just sell more, right? We have to go out and raise it. And I remember I had lunch with him, and I said to him, he says this thing. He says, we raise every dollar that God intends for us to raise, not a dollar more and not a dollar less. And sometimes we budget correctly, sometimes we budget incorrectly. And so I remember just thinking about this, and I was like, you sit on top a $110 million organization. You employ 1,400 people whose livelihoods who lay on the success of this, organization. And I was like, do you really not worry about the outcomes? Like, do you really not worry about either our program performance or our fundraising operation and targets? Like, do you not lose sleep over those things? Because I think I would have a hard time. If I was the CEO of an organization that had 1,400 people's lives in my hands and $110 million that we had to go raise, I think before I went to sleep, I'd be like, is it going to happen? Are we going to meet our goals? Are we going to meet our forecast? And he looked me in the eyes and he said, I really don't. We raise every dollar that God intends, not a dollar more, not a dollar less. He says, if I believe and have faith in God, I have to trust God for the outcome. And that was such a powerful thing for me to hear, that somebody sitting atop 1,400 other people's lives to say, I trust God for the outcome. I believe and have faith that this is what God wants us to do, but I trust God for the outcome because I can't control that. And ultimately, the only thing that I can do is have faith in God. And I remember writing it down and just being like, wow, that is fascinating. And then he interrupted me and he said, but what I do lose sleep over is, did we do the right thing for the right reason? Did we do the right thing for the right reason? So if we miss our fundraising goal, He will say, I'm not losing sleep over the money that we raised. I think we went and we did that right. That's what God, I can't change that outcome. But why did we not get the right forecast? Could we have done something better? Did we have the right fundraising strategy? If we miss our program goals, what went wrong in that chain? Can we change this to make sure? Did everybody that I'm hiring make the right choice for the right reason? And he goes, I will lose sleep over that, because he is a CEO after all. But to me, that was a very impactful moment, because here is somebody who sits atop this organization and says, I trust God for the outcomes. What I need to do is do the right thing for the right reason. And when I hear that in the context of Ruth, in the context of Boaz in Ruth chapter 3, is I'm going to do God's will, God's way. And friends, this is our responsibility. To say, step 1, that's great. You take the bold choice. Day 2, like you got to figure it out. Like you just keep grinding, you get on it. But ongoing, the scaling for the future, you got to trust God for the outcome. But what you need to do is keep doing the right thing for the right reasons. Keep doing God's will, God's way. And when that hard choice comes to you to reconcile with that toxic leader, and you know it's the right thing, you make yourself say yes. And then you trust God for the outcome. Because actually, I don't honestly know whether that conversation is ever going to happen, because that was months ago. But I'm glad I said yes, because I'm trusting God for the outcome. And I don't know whether the result of that conversation will be something where he, gets recognized for that and the board steps in and something like that. I don't know whether he apologizes to me or not, but I will not lose sleep over whether he apologizes to me or not, because I've done the right thing for the right reason. And that's all I can control. The last thing I'll say is I was in the throes of the maelstrom of this sort of, there were all these leaders that stepped down from this organization. And again, they're doing good work, but it was just not done the right way. And I was talking, and I was coming out of a meeting and with a friend of mine. And we were talking. She was on the board at the time, before. And then, and so we were talking, and we were actually talking about this. Like, how are you? How's it going? What have you heard? This and that. Like, we were talking about this. And literally, we were at a conference, and we were walking back from dinner. And this was what was fresh on our minds. And there was a big conference. There was like 5,000 people. It was like all these different people. So my head was like on a swivel, because I was like, oh my God, I know that person, whatever. So we were walking back from dinner, and then I saw a friend that I met in college, who many, many years later was he's a seminary professor. And I was like, oh my gosh, Alan. I was like, let's catch up. And then he's like, let's take a selfie. So he takes out his phone, and my friend who I was with, she's like, oh, I don't want to be in the selfie. So she literally ducks out of the photo. Alan and I take this photo, right? And then she ducks out of the photo while and she literally physically bumps into someone that's there at this conference. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And, blah, blah, and they start talking. So I'm taking this selfie. I take the selfie and I turn around. And I was like, where's my friend? And I turn around and I was like, oh, she's talking to this other person. And so I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, hi, whatever, right? Like, who are you? Who are you talking to? And then the third woman, let me just give you names. Yuli was the person I was friends with, and she's talking to Jen. And so she's like, oh, Yuli goes, oh, this is Jen. I just bumped into her. We're just having a conversation. And Jen says to me, hey, didn't you speak at an Asian American Women's Conference in Chicago the year before, right? Which was the Honor Summit in Chicago. I was like, yes. And then I was like, oh, wait, I had lunch with you and your daughter. And she's like, yes. So we met, and we were like catching up and this and that. And Yuli's standing there, and she's like, oh my gosh, the three of us were like vibing. And then the conference was about to go on, right? But we were just like having this moment. And Jen goes, I don't need to go to the session. So like, you guys want to just go across the street and get Starbucks? And I was like, you don't have to tell me to skip a session. So I was like, yeah, I'll go skip, and I'll go to Starbucks. So the three of us went out to Starbucks during the evening session at this conference. We talked for about 3.5 hours. And we were just sharing our heart, sharing our passion about wanting to mentor Asian American leaders, to just like build and invest in Asian American Christian leaders in America. And I joked at the end of this time, I was like, oh, hey, when are we going to start this organization that we're all talking about, to do the thing that we're all talking about, thinking that was a joke. Yuli is a PhD in organizational leadership. So you don't make a joke about starting an organization with Yuli Lee. So literally before we left that conference, I didn't think about it again. But before we left that conference, she had called somebody and said, hey, I feel like God is calling us to do something. Are you in? This woman was not at the conference, but she was just, yeah, I'm in. Then we came back and Yuli goes, hey, I think we're going to start something. And she's like, I want you and Jen to be part of it. And we had this other woman, Joyce. We brought this other guy, Alex, in. And the five of us started this organization. It's called Cora Collective. We started in last May, just launched. And it's just really us, we're just getting off the ground, but we're trying to create space for Asian American leaders. We're trying to create leadership development alongside spiritual direction, alongside racial identity. We're trying to create healthy leaders, what we're calling spacious leadership. Spacious leadership is basically on the opposite end of, guess what? Toxic leadership. I'm so humbled by the fact that here I was at this dinner trying to just like sort through my experience with this toxic leader, planning on having conversations to follow up. And God was like, I have something different planned for you. In fact, I'm not even asking you to take that step. I'm just going to sort of back you into it. I'm asking Yuli to take that step for you. But I'm gonna mix things up a little bit. Yuli's gonna spin around, bump into this girl, and then you're gonna go and have coffee for 3.5 hours. You're gonna catch a vision, and you're gonna go back home, and you're gonna start this thing. And the picture for me is the picture of God saying, I have something in mind, and I'm gonna do it my way. Because I was around a leader who saw a good vision for what this organization that they wanted to run was to do, but he wasn't doing it God's way. And I was the recipient of that. But God, years later, said, you know what? I want to do something else through you and through your friends. And I actually believe, if I didn't have that experience in that other organization, I don't think I would have had the heart. I don't think I would have had the mind. I don't think I would have had the eyes. I certainly would have had the experience to be able to do the work that God is calling me to do now. And that's something that I could not see back then. But God was doing his will, his way. And my job is to just keep stepping in front of me, following God. Friends, what is that for you? It doesn't have to be something grand. It doesn't have to be like this, serendipitous Starbucks meeting, right? It doesn't have to be starting an organization. It doesn't have to be. But what is that faithful step in front of you? There's some of you that are on the precipice of step one. You're back in Ruth 1. And maybe you've been standing there for years. I know I need to do this. I know that this is what God wants me to do. And maybe it's not about your job. Maybe it's about a relationship. Maybe it's having a conversation. Maybe it's forgiving someone in your heart. But you're seeing that step and you're saying, I know that that's what I need to do. And maybe that's the step in front of you. Maybe you've taken that step and now you're still looking around and you're wandering in fields and just going, anybody got any food? You're just looking at, how does this work, God? Where's my life? Where does the money come from? Where does the time come from? Where does the passion come from? Like, what do I do? How do I live? Where does this take me? Where do I go? Maybe for you, that next step is just getting on with the life of having made the decision of step one. And maybe for us, it's this step 3 and on, right? This Ruth chapter 3, this ongoing of saying, like, how are we going to live? How are we going to make this work on and on and on into the future? Because there's probably some shortcuts you could take. There are probably some ways that you can actually, God, I know what you want me to do, but I think I know a better way. Or will you say, no, I'm going to do this the right way? I didn't plan on saying this, but I know a little bit about from an outside perspective of what this church has gone through, and I bet that there are probably some people that are no longer here, and I'm not judging them. They make their own decisions, and that may be God's will for them, but it also may not be. It may be a shortcut. It may just be like, you know what, I just want to be where it's easier and where I don't have to do as much and where I'm, whether I can come and go and people don't notice. But the fact that you're here on a Saturday night, on a frigid Saturday night, I think says something about that commitment, that doing God's will in the right way. And it doesn't mean that you're going to die in this church and that you can never leave. But for right now, this season, it seems like God is calling you to stay and calling you to commit and calling you to carry this church forward. For you, it may be step 1 or step 2 or steps onward in your life. My challenge to you is, let's take that step. Let's commit to taking that step. We're going to actually just close in prayer right now. And Pastor Joe, we'll have the worship team come up and worship and lead us in. But I want us to pray a little bit of time. And I want Pastor Joe and I, we'll be up here. And I'm going to just challenge you that if you're willing to commit to that next step and just willing to be able to say, I want to do it, I want you to be able to confess that to God. And if you want to verbalize that to someone else, another human in the room, Pastor Joe and I will be up here, and we would love to pray for you. We would love to support you in that step. So why don't we take a moment now to pray. As we did the first night, I'd just like for us to just open up our palms. You can lay them on your legs. And just be in a posture of openness. To just say, God, may I be willing to receive what you have for me.